is Yasmine Ibrahim from UNICEF, who will be speaking about, and this is what's really interesting in the linkage between the labor and the social protection, because at the end of the day, Lebanon does have a strategy for national social protection strategy. It remains a strategy. It remains on paper largely, and I think we need to think of how do we actually activate that and what sort of taxes we need, because it's not only about activating a strategy if the taxes are misguided.
Thank you, Aldic, for inviting UNICEF to this important and timely discussion around tax. Some of you might wonder, why is UNICEF invited to this panel discussion? UNICEF for every child, that has to do with education, child protection, and so on. Just to give you a bit of a background on why is UNICEF here today. So basically, we do work on social policies because we see that social policies lead to the ultimate objective of eventually reducing poverty, increasing quality, and so on. And in the social policy in UNICEF Lebanon country office, we do have two main streams, if you want. One that has to do with social protection, which has to do with the system strengthening, the humanitarian aspect, providing assistance to vulnerable groups and children. And another streamline, which we call public finance for children. And why we work on public finance? Because as per the CRC, the Convention for the Right of Children that Lebanon has ratified, and under the Article 4, the state is required to use its maximum extent of its resources to realize children's rights. And from that aspect, we do work on public finance to ensure that children are visible in the national budget. So in practice, what do we do? In practice, we do monitor and track every year the national budget that is developed by the government of Lebanon to understand a bit what are the priority of the government, the policy direction, are children being taken into consideration as they should, and so on, because we believe better allocation, better distribution of public resources lead eventually to equity, fairness, and so on. On the revenue side, we're not technical experts on tax, but we do advocate for better taxes in terms of fairness, progressive system, and so on. And these two streams, social protection and public finance, as Sami already mentioned, they are interlinked. How do you finance social protection schemes? You need public finance, you need financing. And the question here today is, how can we rebuild this fiscal social contract, meaning if I stop looking at tax only as a fiscal tool, but also as part of rebuilding the social contract to regain or rebuild that trust between the citizen and the state that has been eroded over the years. But first, to understand a bit, where do we need to go? I'm just going to give a small snapshot of where do we stand today. And as Sami said, it's true that if we look at taxes, in the 2026 budget, based on the analysis that TPI has done, 86% of taxes are collected from indirect regressive taxes. And as a reminder, what do we mean by regressive taxes? Meaning mainly from VAT. If I pay 11% on an item, the same person, regardless of their income, they will pay also 11%, which means the poorer or more vulnerable households are disproportionately affected, and leaving the wealthiest households undertaxed compared to the lower income. Exactly. On the social aspect, if you look at the social spending, and there has been an analysis that was done by the Institute of Finance on how much is the government spending on social protection in Lebanon. If you look at it pre-crisis, it was around 5 to 6% of GDP, which was considered relatively moderate compared to the MENA region. But if you dig deeper, most of it was skewed towards the public sector pension, leaving a big proportion of the population with no coverage, no protection, and completely vulnerable, and very vulnerable when there is a shock, there is a crisis, they will be the first to fall into poverty. Also, on other aspects of the government allocations, if you look also at the pre-crisis, the government was mainly focused on paying its debt service, fuel subsidies that were considered very regressive, and that were lifted when it was too late. And the trend in terms of how the allocations are distributed, even after the crisis, it's relatively the same. A big portion of the budget is going to pay for salaries and so on, leaving a small portion to use for social spending, social services. And what did the government do by doing these fiscal policies? It basically intentionally or unintentionally kind of financed inequality in the country and eroded the trust that was completely gone, especially after the uprising. And this morning, Mr. Luai was saying the taxpayer does not trust the system by asking why me and not the other. But it's also not only why me. Why should I pay tax if I don't see anything in return, if I don't see a benefit in return? No, I'm not trying to say that the whole picture is completely bleak. Over the past year, the government did take some good, important steps, and as Sami mentioned, of which is the approval and launching of the National Social Protection Strategy, which is the first ever framework that aims to move the country towards an integrated, comprehensive social protection system. Some of the interventions in the strategy are already being implemented, and the government is contributing, but still a lot of it needs to be done. And here the question is, how can we finance this social protection strategy so that it becomes effective? And how can we create fiscal space to implement the strategy? So the question is not if we can afford social protection, but how can we create fiscal space in a fair and equitable manner, and by putting tax reforms that are strategically fair. So I do realize that Lebanon has a problem in terms of fiscal constraints and budget constraints, but most importantly, the question is, how can I better collect resources and how should I distribute them in a fair and equitable manner? I will not get into the tax reforms that should be done. I think in the morning panel we had experts who gave a lot of options, and as some of the options were like a sin tax or a tax on ultra-processed food, which they have kind of also a preventative angle because you prevent people to needing health services in the future. But I think we've agreed in the morning that there are options if we want to do tax reforms that are equitable and fair and that can allow the government to raise more taxes. I will just add another angle that can be a measure, non-fiscal measure if you want, which is the social registry. What is the social registry? It's a database that includes the data of the citizens in the country, and it allows me to understand who's benefiting from what and how is the tax used to distribute the different benefits. It makes the system more efficient because it allows me to understand if a certain household is benefiting twice, or there is a duplication, or someone should be included in the social protection scheme or excluded. So this is the link also that can, as a social registry, that can help me also make the system more efficient. And this will allow me to increase more transparency. If I, as a citizen, understand why am I paying tax, and I see what am I getting in return in terms of benefit, this will increase the trust in the system. And this, as Sami said, will allow me to see the return of this tax as a taxpayer. I will be more willing to pay, to comply, and hopefully it will reduce resistance if there are new tax measures, because I know that the money will go to benefit me or someone in need. Just to very quickly conclude, in simple terms, if you want to just simplify it, again, we need to understand that tax reforms are not only to increase revenues and collect money. We need this change, a shift in the mindset. Like, I'm not only taking resources from citizens with no visibility on what kind of benefits they receive. They need to see what do they receive in return, so that I increase this mutual accountability. Me as a taxpayer, I have to pay my duty, and the government has to fulfill its obligation to give me benefits and services in return. And just to conclude, and maybe here we need to nudge Lebanon, how to change this behavior, to change this, the mindset of the taxpayer to see this as I'm paying for the common good of the society and the common well-being of the society. And I believe this would be like a first step to make the country move towards a more resilient path.